Megumi Fushiguro is a fraud. Think about it, the son of Toji Zenin, the sorcerer killer, and one of the strongest of all time, a man who didn't need curse energy to fall the strongest sorcerers alive. Megumi inherits the 10 Shadows technique from the Zenin clan, one of the most feared toolkits in the Jujutsu world, and he has Satoru Gojo, the Satoru Gojo, personally bankrolling his development, shielding him from clan politics, and essentially gift-wrapping him a future that most sorcerers would kill for. And what does Megumi do with all of that? He spams Mahoraga summons. Every time shit goes sideways, his grand strategy is to summon the Shikigami that he can't control. He never masters the 10 Shadows, he never builds a real fighting identity, and 60 years later in Mojulo, he gets taken out off screen by a grade 1 curse. And honestly, fitting for such a bomb and Gege's trash rising. Now, if you heard all of that and laughed or nodded along or thought, yeah, that tracks, congratulations, you are exactly who this video is about. Because everything I just said does the thing we've all gotten dangerously comfortable with. It takes real events from the story and arranges them in a way that sounds like analysis, and rewards you for not thinking about it for more than 5 seconds. It's the kind of thing that gets 100k likes on a leaked thread at 6 AM. It's the kind of take that has quietly eroded how we engage with stories. And if I'm being honest, how we engage with most things. So no, this isn't really a video about Megumi. It's about ourselves. There's a concept in educational research called the illusion of knowing, described by Glenberg, Wilkinson, and Epstein in 1982. The idea is almost embarrassingly simple. People consistently believe they understand something just because they've been exposed to it. You see the words, you recognize the names, your brain files the whole thing under "got it" and moves on, even when you couldn't explain the core idea to save your life. That was a classroom problem in the 80s. Now, it's the operating system of the entire internet. We scroll through a thread about geopolitics and feel informed. We watch a 60-second breakdown of a court ruling and feel like we read the opinion. We see a tweet summarizing a 250-chapter manga and feel like we've read the manga. And the thing is, the feeling is identical to actual understanding. Your brain actually can't tell the difference. It just files it and keeps scrolling. And listen, I'm not about to stand here and act holier-than down and pretend I'm above it. I, for one, have formed fully confident opinions about chapters at 2 AM based on a tweet I half read. We've all been there. The question isn't whether it happens, it's whether we've noticed how much it's reshaped the way we process things. The OECD surveys of adult skills has tracked declining literacy proficiency across developed nations for years. The 2024 APA report flagged measurable drops in critical thinking disposition among university students. Not because people got dumber, but because the environments they operate in stopped requiring sustained thoughts. Why sit with a complex argument for 20 minutes when a 30-second video gives you the same dopamine hits of feeling like you understood it? The path of least resistance became the only path, and media, specifically manga in this instance, has just been caught in the crossfire. So why JJK specifically? I mean, not every series gets hit the same way by this. One Piece, for instance, is designed to be comprehension proof. For the most part anyway. Oda builds his emotional beats like IMAX set pieces, broad and unmissable. He'll give you a flashback, a double thread, a character screaming their motivation into the sky, practically a neon sign flashing, "Feel this now." You could skim One Piece and still walk away with something close to the intended experience. Naruto does something similar. It states its themes explicitly, sometimes multiple times in the same arc, just to make sure. I'm going to be the Hokage isn't subtextual at all. It's bolded, underlined, and repeated. JJK does none of that. JJK is a series that uses continuously moving parts and action as narrative devices for exposition. Gege buries the meaning inside the mechanics and trusts you to dig it out, which is a bold move when your readership is increasingly consuming your work through leaked summaries at 6 AM. But don't worry, we'll get there. So let's take Nanami for instance. His curse technique is interesting enough on its own, but the real character work lives in overtime. His output is literally bound to his work schedule, stronger after hours. On the surface, it's a pretty cool gimmick, but this is a man who worked a corporate job and found it soulless and draining, and came back to sorcery because at least the violence had a purpose, and then compartmentalized his entire existence into the hours I endure and the hours I allow myself to be dangerous. So the technique isn't just a technique, it's a biography compressed into a mechanic. But in a leak summary, he's just ratio guy, 7 to 8, hits hard. The person vanishes. The mechanic becomes a wiki entry. Domain expansions do the same thing on a larger scale. Mahito's self-embodiment of perfection is a space where the soul is exposed and malleable, because Mahito's entire worldview is that identity has no sanctity, that people are just clay. Gojo's unlimited void floats the target with infinite information until they shut down, because that's Gojo's actual life. It perceives everything, constantly, and it's made him the most powerful and most isolated person on the planet. His domain is his loneliness weaponized. So, if you're paying attention, every domain expansion tells you more about a character than any flashback could. But if you're not paying attention, if you're reading a summary, skimming for action beats, consuming the chapter through someone else's reaction thread, all of that collapses into, well, cool domain, but who won? The thematic architecture goes invisible, and once it is invisible, the story loses depth and starts looking incoherent, because you're seeing events without the connective tissue that makes them mean something. Your brain fills the gap with bad writing. JJK is a story that demands careful reading in an era that has systematically dismantled the habit of careful reading. And the mechanism that accelerated the dismantling has a name. Listen here, manga leaks have existed for as long as manga has been serialized. Someone at the printer photographs pages early, someone in distribution breaks street dates. That part isn't new. What is new is that leaks have become an industry. There's dedicated accounts with posting schedules, communities with hierarchies, leakers with large follower accounts and brand identity, and audiences bigger than some official manga channels. And let's just be honest, these people are farming engagement of someone else's creative labor and dressing it up as a public service. But the real damage isn't about giving credits, it's what leaks do to the act of reading itself. The cycle goes something like this. Text spoilers drop first, a rough summary, no visuals, no context. Then raw scans, sometimes out of order. Then speed translations, fast, frequently inaccurate, and definitely missing nuance. And then hours or days before the official release, the discourse begins. And by the time the actual chapter drops, the version Gege actually intended, with the paneling, the pacing, the composition, the conversation is already over. Opinions are already locked in. The official release, instead of starting a conversation, walks into a room where the verdict was delivered yesterday. There's a 2011 study by Leutner, Leopold, and Sumflet that showed something that maps onto this perfectly. When people receive summarized information before the full source material, the depth of processing drops significantly. The summary creates a mental framework, and the brain uses that as a filter, confirming what fits and discarding what doesn't. So you're not really reading the chapter anymore. You're checking in against what you already know. Every week, hundreds of thousands of readers form their understanding of a chapter from a degraded, context-free summary before they ever see the actual pages. And by the time they do, their brain is running confirmation bias on autopilot. Reading gives way to auditing, and the audit is based on a version that was never the real thing. Now, I have to be fair here, because if I pretend the next part doesn't exist, someone in the comments will remind me, and sadly, they would be right. Leaks do generate hype. I mean, that's just factual. When Gojo vs Sukuna was reaching its peak, the leaks turned every week into a collective event. Text spoilers would drop, and within minutes, every manga corner of the internet was ablaze. Theories, fan arts, memes, bets on who's standing at the end, all before a single official page went live. It felt like the entire community was experiencing the story together, across time zones, in real time. That shared anticipation is the manga equivalent of a packed stadium watching the same play unfold, and for a lot of readers, that is the weekly experience. That's what makes serialized manga feel alive in a way binge reading a series might never capture. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that that doesn't matter. The hype is real, the community is real, but what exactly is the community sharing? Because when Gojo fell, the leaked thread reaction wasn't a collective processing of what the moment meant. It was an instant sorting into camps. Gege cooked, Gege fumbled, Gojo got nerfed, Sukuna is the king of ass pulls. Positions locked within hours, based on text spoilers that couldn't convey the paneling, the silence in the aftermath panels, the negative space that Gege used to let the loss breathe. Everyone was in the stadium. Half the crowd was watching a different game on their phones and arguing about the score of that one. The shared experience is real, but it's a shared experience of reacting, not reading. and reacting together to incomplete information doesn't build comprehension. It instead builds consensus that hardens before the actual text even exists, and then becomes the lens the actual text gets judged through. Hype and understanding are two different currencies. We've gotten dangerously good at spending one and thinking we earn the other, which is how you end up with a discourse full of people who felt every chapter dropped and understood almost none of them. Someone watches one YouTube video about narrative structure, learns the phrase Chekhov's gun, and then spends the next 6 months telling everyone that Gege violated basic storytelling principles because the plot thread didn't go where they predicted on Reddit. Someone else picks up pacing issues and deploys it like a weapon in every chapter discussion, without once being able to explain what pacing actually means in a visual medium, how panel density, page turns, white space, and reading rhythm control the experience of time. They say plot hole when they actually mean, I didn't understand this. They say bad writing with the confidence of a tenured professor when the entire analytical framework is just vibes, a half-remembered YouTube essay, and whatever take got the most likes last Thursday. The internet gave everyone a microphone, and the algorithm generally can't tell the difference between a decade of studying narrative craft and 10 minutes of research on TikTok. Both get the same reach, but the one who's louder wins. That's not just a manga problem. People do this with politics, nutrition, economics, everything. But in manga spaces, it creates a situation where the most confident voices in JJK discourse are consistently the least informed. The people who tracked binding vowel mechanics through arcs, who understand why Megumi fights the way he does, who could explain how idol transfiguration functions as a thematic argument about the soul. Those people got drowned out by a tsunami of leaked red takes from people cosplaying as analysts. And the cosplay is pretty convincing because the takes use real information, real names, real events. They just didn't understand any of it. The Megumi take I opened with, that's exactly what one looks like. Real information arranged to sound like criticism, arriving at a conclusion that rewards you for not going any deeper. A costume. From a distance it looks like analysis, but when you look up close, there's nothing inside. And the wildest part about this, if you point this out, if you say, hey, maybe the character is more complex than that, you get hit with, or you're just coping, or you're a Gege glazer. The discourse has evolved antibodies against depth, and nuance gets treated as copium. Careful reading gets treated as bias. The only acceptable posture is confident dismissal delivered fast and with zero hesitation. Genuinely impressive, to be honest, but in the worst possible way. So, since we keep circling back to him, let's actually talk about Fushiguro, the one on the actual page. Megumi Fushiguro is a kid that's born into violence. His father, Toji, was a prodigy of a different kind, so physically gifted that he never needed curse energy, so brutalized by the Zen clan's hierarchy that becomes a mercenary, sold his own children's future, and died fighting Gojo in a job that was never really personal. Megumi grows up in the aftermath. No father, a sister, Sumiki, who becomes his entire emotional anchor, and a power that he never asked for, inherited from a clan that would have used him as a tool if Gojo hadn't stepped in. But here's the thing that the fraud takes always miss. Megumi's so-called underperforming stems from a fundamental crisis of self-worth that shapes every tactical decision he makes. He doesn't believe his life matters outside of his utility to others. He fights to protect people, Sumiki, Yuji, Nobara, but he never fights for himself. When things get desperate, his instinct isn't to dig deeper, it's to throw himself away. Thus, Maharaga becomes a weaponizable suicide button with plausible deniability. He's basically saying, I'll summon the thing I can't control, and if it kills me, at least it might take the enemy with it. That is a kid who has decided, somewhere deep down and quiet, that he's expendable. Gojo sees this, and that's the entire point of his investment. Not just the 10 shadow ceiling, but the kid underneath, who needs someone to say, your life matters, not because of what you can do, but because it's yours. When Sukuna hijacks Megumi's body during the Cullen game, the violation goes beyond just physical. It's the ultimate confirmation of Megumi's worst belief about himself, that he was always just a vessel, a container for someone else's power, not a person. His rescue, with Yuji literally diving into his soul, not just to pull him back, but to provide him with a choice, is the narrative answer to that belief. It shows him that he matters, that he has a choice in his life. In a leaked summary, all of that becomes 4 words. Had potential, but got saved. And from those 4 words, people build an entire discourse about how Megumi was wasted, how his arc went nowhere, how he's a fraud who never lived up to his bloodline. His character arc in the series becomes reduced to a stat sheet. Then they get mad at Gege for wasting potential when they never truly met the character. JJK's sequel, Modulo, set 60 years after the original, tries to do something genuinely ambitious. It's a story about what comes after the battles, after the trauma, after the existential threats that have been neutralized, and the world has to figure out how to keep going. It's about integration, coexistence, how sorcerers and ordinary people learn to share a world that nearly tore itself apart. It touches on themes of immigration, cultural friction, the psychological aftermath of surviving something that should have caused extinction. Yuji, 60 years later, is a man who is succeeding in his mission, help people, save lives, but somewhere along the line, lost track of who he was when there's nothing left to fight, going through the motions of a life he's not sure belongs to him anymore. The story explores this through a Buddhist lens, ignorance and awakening, and the idea that what saves you isn't power but connection, reaching across the divide to someone different from you and choosing understanding over fear. Maru embodies this, and it's through Maru's example that Yuji starts to find his way back, not through combat but through relationship. It's a beautiful thematic project, and Gege tells it in 25 chapters. 25! Now, some of that compression is just Gege being Gege. I mean, the man has never met a moment that he couldn't speedrun. Fair craft critique, but there's something underneath the craft choice that's harder to sit with. We live in a world where if you want to say something important, I mean genuinely important, about acceptance, about what it costs to rebuild, about the slow and glamorous work of learning to coexist, you don't get the luxury of being slow about it. Attention is the scarcest resource in the modern economy, and the exchange rate is brutal. You get 25 chapters, you get a 15-second hook, you get one scroll length before someone else's thumb moves. A story about patience, about sitting with discomfort, choosing the difficult work of understanding over the quick satisfaction of judgment, and it has to sprint to the finish because the culture won't let it breathe. If that irony doesn't sting you a little, I don't know what will. So here's the final picture, and it's circular. Leaks drop, people consume a degraded summary, they form opinions from incomplete information. These opinions get amplified by algorithms that reward speed and confidence. The discourse turns hostile because everyone is arguing about a version of the story that doesn't fully exist yet. The hostility generates engagement, which drives more people to seek leaks earlier, which means more people forming opinions from even less information. The official release becomes an afterthought, an awkward late arrival to a party that's already trashed the house. So where does that leave the readers who do engage carefully? Well, they walk into a conversation that's already been poisoned. The terms are already set, the consensus has already been manufactured. Trying to offer a nuanced reading of a chapter that the community has already decided is ass feels like bringing a book to a bar fight. So, they disengage, they stop posting, they leave the discourse to the loudest and least careful voices, and so the cycle accelerates. To me, this is what happened in JJK's final stretch. The story didn't suddenly become incomprehensible. The reading conditions became incomprehensible. The gap between the story that Gege was writing and the story that the community was experiencing widened until there were essentially two different texts. One existed on the page, the other existed in TikToks and Twitter arguments and YouTube thumbnails with red circles and Gege cooked. And that second version is the one that most people actually engaged with. The manga didn't fail its readers, the reading environment failed the manga. I want to be careful here because the last thing I want is for this to curdle into a lecture. Nobody owes a manga their undivided intellectual commitments. I think people can engage with stories casually. That's fine. I mean, I've read plenty of things casually. Sometimes a chapter drops and I just want to know if the fight was cool or not. I think that's valid. But there's a difference between choosing to engage casually and losing the ability to engage in any other way. That second part, the slow atrophy of the muscle for sustained attention, that's what keeps nagging at me. When you train yourself to consume stories through summaries, you lose the tolerance for ambiguity. When you form opinions before you have complete information and never go back to revise, you lose the reflex for self-correction. When you perform analysis instead of doing it long enough, consistently enough, you eventually can't tell the difference between the two. And these aren't manga skills. Nobody's life depends on correctly interpreting binomial mechanics. But the underlying capacities, reading carefully, withholding judgment, sitting with complexity long enough to understand it before you flatter it into a take. These are how you navigate a world that is genuinely and increasingly becoming complicated and would never fit inside a single tweet. I started this video with a bad take, one that sounded smart, used aerial information and arrived at a conclusion that felt satisfying. And if you're being honest with yourself, really honest, some part of you, maybe even for a split second, thought it may have had a point. And trust me, that's not a personal failing. It's the byproduct of an environment we've all been marinating in. The algorithms, the leak culture, the engagement economy, the slow replacement of reading with skimming and analysis with performance. None of us are immune. I mean, I literally said that I've done it. Media literacy isn't an academic credential. It's not a badge you earn. It's just a habit. The habit of pausing before you react, going to the source before you form an opinion, sitting with something long enough to actually understand before you decide what you think. Right now, everything in the world is engineered to break that habit. Every platform, every algorithm, every content format. So maybe the move is small. Maybe it's just reading the chapter, the actual chapter, before the thread, before the takes, before the discourse. Just sitting with the thing that someone made and giving it the time that it's asking for. It won't trend, it won't get engagement. It's not optimized for anything. But maybe, just maybe, you might actually understand what you're looking at. And honestly, I think that's what more.